One evening, I was seated at our table perusing my daughter Katie's medical forms. She was preparing to commence kindergarten, and the pediatrician conducted a comprehensive physical examination. My wife, meanwhile, left her school forms in a disorganized state on the table. I happened to glance at them and discovered the letter that had precipitated the dissolution of my marriage. The column indicated the blood type, which I read with a sudden sense of shock. I was momentarily paralyzed, unable to process the information. I then retrieved 2 sheets of paper from the cabinet, which I recognized as belonging to our medical records. Everything was precisely as I remembered it from last summer, when my wife and I had donated blood to the Red Cross. Each of us received a receipt indicating our blood types are listed on 2 sheets of paper. My blood type is B and my wife's is O. Therefore, it was not possible for Katie to be my daughter, as my wife was her mother. I observed Marie giving birth to her, and it was evident that a type A individual was the father. The children were already asleep, and Marie was upstairs watching TV. I proceeded to retrieve a beer from the refrigerator and sat in the backyard to ponder the circumstances of my marriage. I proceeded to the refrigerator and sat in the backyard, contemplating the nature of my marriage. I would characterize it as relatively typical, encompassing a range of positive and negative experiences. The quality of my relationship with Marie fluctuated depending on the time period under consideration. During the early stages of our marriage, we were deeply in love and engaged in frequent sexual intercourse. We were in constant contact with one another, holding hands, walking hand in hand, stroking each other's neck or back as we passed by. After a period of time, however, this behavior diminished. It would seem that such changes are typical in any marriage. However, the recent discovery of her infidelity has prompted me to re-examine my thoughts about our marriage. I was on the verge of dissolution. I sat and reflected on the precipitating factors which seemed to have occurred gradually or suddenly. The decline in our sexual activity appeared to be gradual at first, but around 6 years ago, a few months before Katie was conceived, there were a few peculiar months. Marie, my open and loving wife, was acting in a peculiar manner one evening. Upon returning from work, I was greeted with a late arrival and a brief kiss. I was immediately dismissed to the shower, and I was avoided for the remainder of the evening. The next morning was just as cold and unceremonious, but that night, she exhibited a striking change in behavior. She returned home early, prepared a special dinner, and put me to bed early. Marie engaged in sexual intercourse with me in a loving and enthusiastic manner, which I had perceived as a loss of intimacy. We embraced and then retired to bed. Marie expressed her affection for me on several occasions that week. We engaged in passionate sexual intercourse. However, the pattern of Marie returning home late from work, avoiding communication, and then quickly retiring to bed resumed. For the following 2 months, I was unable to ascertain who I had married. Marie displayed a range of behaviors including passion, love, coldness, attention, distance, preoccupation, patience, and irritability. I inquired on numerous occasions about potential issues, seeking to understand if there were any concerns or difficulties between us. I inquired about potential issues at her workplace, but she merely responded, "I don't know. Bill, I'm probably just a little nervous." After approximately 3 months, the situation had not improved. It was less favorable than at the beginning of our marriage. Marie's mood improved, but she was still not affectionate. Her level of affection and interest in sexual intimacy appeared to diminish significantly. The frequency of sexual intercourse declined to a point where it occurred less than once a week, and on occasion, it was as infrequent as once every 2 weeks. Even when I made a gentle request, such as suggesting that we engage in sexual activity that evening, it was met with a firm refusal. It had been a considerable length of time since Marie had engaged in sexual intercourse with me in a manner that indicated she was merely performing a favor for me. It was unclear whether such a pattern was typical of all marriages. Given my limited familiarity with the subject, I was unable to offer a definitive answer. However, I found myself contemplating various possibilities, including the possibility of an affair was the most likely explanation, but soon after Marie became pregnant, our shared excitement about the future baby and the joy of having our wonderful Katie crowded out most of my worries about our marriage. After Katie was born, Marie and I were constantly tired, so her lack of interest in sex was easier to understand. However, I still wasn't happy about it. When Katie turned 3, Marie became pregnant again, and we had Brian just after Katie's 4th birthday. Bill and Marie became parents of two wonderful, exhausting children. We both adored our children. However, I now realized that I was deeply unhappy with the state of our marriage and our virtual lack of sex life. I was discontented with the status of my marriage and the dearth of sexual intimacy in our relationship. At the time, I was unaware of the underlying cause. However, upon gaining a deeper understanding, I concluded that this was a common experience among couples with young children. Now, armed with the knowledge that my daughter was not biologically mine, the events of 6 years ago no longer seemed enigmatic. Marie, it is plausible that an affair commenced at this juncture. This would account for the abrupt departure to the shower, the fervid sexual intercourse, and the subsequent displays of affection. The latter could be attributed to either guilt or a desire to preserve her marriage by maintaining the affair. I remained in the yard, observing these events. As the darkness fell and the stars grew brighter, my initial shock gave way to mounting anger. My loving wife not only cuckolded me but also gave me someone else's child to raise. There was a possibility that Brian was not mine either. If I had been solely focused on punishing Marie, I would have entered the house and presented her with the evidence of her blood type. I then forced her to confess and I expelled the liar from our home. However, this was not an easy task. I adore my children, regardless of whether they are biologically mine. If we divorce, Mary will most likely obtain sole custody of them. Once it is established that they are not mine, I sat and thought. I posed the question to myself, what do I want? The answers were surprisingly clear. First, I want to know exactly what Marie did. Was it a short novel? Does she even know that Katie isn't my child? Or does she know everything and has been sleeping with some guy behind my back for many years? Second, I want to raise it was my intention to raise my children as my own and to conceal the fact that I was not their biological father. Once I had identified my objectives, I found that the means of achieving them were relatively straightforward. I returned to the house and discovered cotton swabs in each of the children's rooms. I proceeded to take a swab from the interior of their cheeks without I worked them and wrapped each one separately. I gave Katie a 2 and Brian a 3. He then proceeded to the kitchen, where he placed a tampon on his cheek and marked it with a 1. I had a friend who was employed in a chemistry laboratory at a university, and I arranged for him to test the DNA on my behalf. This constituted the inaugural step in what was to become a lengthy process. Upon receipt of my initial response, I promptly identified the subsequent action I would take. 1 week later, my colleague contacted me. He was unaware of the identity of the individuals whose samples he was testing. I informed him that I had encountered individuals with the same last name and that we were attempting to ascertain whether we were distant relatives. Hello, Bill. I have results for your 2 and 3. It is evident that they are indeed relatives. They are brothers and sisters, yet your sample is not related to any of them. It would seem that these individuals are not your cousins. I expressed my gratitude and terminated the call, thus confirming that Katie and Brian were siblings, born to the same parents. Marie had 2 children with this enigmatic individual, yet it remains unclear whether she was aware of his paternity. It is evident that she was aware of her sexual relationship with this individual, yet it remains unclear whether she was cognizant of his status as the biological father of our children. There existed a straightforward method to ascertain this information. I proceeded to the kitchen, where Marie was engaged in the task of washing dishes. Honey, I wish to inquire about something, I began, turning to face her. She instructed me to speak my mind, and I proceeded to do so. A colleague of mine who is a biologist is engaged in research that requires DNA samples from individuals with known familial relationships. I informed him that I would obtain samples from you, from me, and from each of the children. I will take care of each of the children before bedtime, and then you and I will take care of ours later. I observed Marie closely as I proceeded to narrate my account. As I reached the midpoint of my narrative, she exhibited a sudden tensing of her muscles and an almost involuntary movement to drop the pan she was washing. However, she quickly regained her composure and continued washing herself. When I concluded my account, a moment of silence ensued, which was eventually broken by her turning around to face me. I must admit that I am not entirely convinced of the merits of this proposal. Bill, how can we be certain that the biologist will not misuse the samples or divulge our information? I began to express my reservations, but she immediately confronted me. I am not enthusiastic about this idea. Please inform your colleague that we do not wish to participate. In any case, her reaction was indicative of her true feelings. My next step was to ascertain as much information as possible about her affair or love affairs, including the where, when, and possibly the why. While I was unsure of the latter, it was plausible that Marie had something hidden in her house that would provide a clue. However, I required additional time to conduct a comprehensive search. On the Saturday in question, we had planned to visit Marie's parents' residence for the afternoon. A few minutes before our scheduled departure, I accessed the bedroom, which served as our temporary residence, via a cellular telephone. I then proceeded to answer the telephone, feigning a conversation with my superior at my place of employment. Upon concluding this act, I approached Marie and expressed my sincerest apologies. I informed her of an imminent and critical work-related emergency necessitating my presence for a minimum of 4 hours. Otherwise, I explained, the company would likely face significant challenges. I then attempted to reassure her, emphasizing that I was aware of her parents' anticipation of meeting their grandchildren. I implored her to convey my regrets to them. You and the children will have an enjoyable time. I will prepare dinner, and I will see you in the evening. She accepted this change in plans without further objection and was soon seated in the vehicle with the children. Now, I had several hours to methodically search the house. I determined that there was minimal benefit in doing so. I conducted a systematic search of the house, focusing on areas where Marie was unlikely to hide items. I thus bypassed the kitchen bookshelves and living room, among other locations. I also excluded my bedroom and bathroom, but I meticulously examined her closet and dresser drawers. I was particularly intrigued by a pair of the lingerie pieces were of a sexual nature and had never been observed by me being worn by her. They were located in a remote area at the far end of the room, concealed beneath everyday items, indicating that she wished to conceal them from me. The children's rooms and attic remained, and I proceeded to the attic, reasoning that the children's rooms were less likely to contain such items. The attic contained a variety of items, some of which were old and lengthy. A number of items were identified as belonging to the category of forgotten pieces of furniture, including a couple of lamps and several boxes of books and other items that predated the wedding. Due to the sheer volume of items, it was not feasible to conduct a thorough examination. Therefore, a more focused approach was adopted. Initially, one of the 3 boxes appeared to be less dusty than the others. Upon closer inspection, it became evident that these boxes had been lifted and moved more recently than the rest of the attic contents, which had not been touched for years. Consequently, these 3 boxes were subjected to further scrutiny, and the desired items were successfully retrieved. These boxes contained a plethora of Marie's personal belongings, primarily comprising letters from friends and acquaintances. In addition, I discovered a collection of letters and memorabilia from Marie's college years, including greeting cards and other personal items. At the bottom of one of the boxes, I found a small stack of more recent notes and 2 videotapes. These tapes, which had no labels, contained notes from Harry. They were brief but explicitly erotic in nature. I proceeded to examine the tapes more closely. A review of the notes, which spanned approximately 20 minutes, revealed significant insights into Marie's infidelity. It became evident that she had engaged in an affair with Harry, her supervisor at the time. The affair is believed to have commenced approximately 3 months prior to the conception of Katie. This was a period when Marie was displaying erratic behavior at home. The majority of the notes were from Harry to Marie and were characterized by a frank and assertive tone. There was no evidence of love in the notes, but there was a clear indication of lust from the outset. The relationship appeared to be characterized by a dynamic of dominance and submission, with Harry exerting control over Marie. Some notes provided instructions on how to dress for specific occasions, while others detailed the manner in which they would engage in sexual intercourse. Following a period of late working, a number of notes conveyed congratulations to Marie on the birth of their children. He also referred to me as a poor fool, indicating that I was unaware that he was raising his children. It was evident that he did not intend to report his children. I was aware that he was married to a woman named Caroline and that they had 3 children of their own. However, Caroline was apparently unaware of his infidelity. As I read the text, I was struck by the clear dominance exhibited by Harry over Marie. However, it was evident that she had consented to this arrangement. There were no indications of coercion or exploitation. It appeared that Marie derived pleasure from assuming this role and adhering to Harry's directives. Furthermore, it was apparent that both individuals were aware of the paternity of the children in question. Marie's two children were aware of the secret knowledge they had over me from these notes. I could not learn anything about Marie, but now there was no longer any doubt that she had been deceiving me for more than 6 years and deliberately giving birth to children from another man, pretending to be my loving wife. I had been angry for days, but these notes intensified my feelings. My plans for renouncing Marie would also include Harry. I thought for a moment, then took the tapes to the VCR and began to watch. Both tapes showed Harry and Marie having sex. The earlier recording, which appeared to have been made in a room I did not recognize, possibly Harry's house, was of a higher quality than the more recent one, which had been made in my own bedroom. This prompted me to consider when Marie had had the opportunity to make the recordings. It occurred to me that I had had several business trips over the past year, and perhaps she was leaving the children with her parents. Overall, the tone of the recordings confirmed Harry's sexual dominance over Marie and her passionate willingness to submit. The lighting was not particularly bright, although they were both clearly visible, but the sound was amazingly good, and I could hear every word. The initial tape begins with Harry issuing commands. He sits on the bed and orders Marie to perform a sexy striptease, which she does with a smile. The sexual encounter is characterized by roughness, lacking in gentleness or affection. Harry speaks to her in a harsh tone. It is evident that Marie derives pleasure from this situation. The second tape features similar sexual scenes but includes new and intriguing dialogue. They are lying on the bed when Marie inquires about Harry's opinion of her raising his children. In response, Harry states that Bill is a decent individual and that Marie has 3 children. Of them, and I no longer care whether or not he is a good father. If it weren't for that, I would simply tell you to leave him. What is he good for besides changing diapers? It is not fair, Harry. Bill is a good and sweet person. He truly loved me and was a great provider for me. The children and I are better off without him. You have allowed me to enjoy myself with you for many years, haven't you? She smiled at him and lightly struck his arm. You have never treated me with the same gentleness and kindness as Bill. That is probably why I like you so much. Yes, baby, I treat you as you wish. Let us proceed with this before I... After viewing both films, I reflected on the arrogance of the individuals responsible for these notes. Not only did they make these notes, but they were also foolish enough to leave them in a place where I could easily find them. My revenge will be comprehensive and will affect both individuals. I used a scanner to digitize each note. I then transferred the notes to my hard drive. To do this, I used software that I had borrowed from work for a project I had completed the previous summer. This software enabled me to convert each videotape into a digital file on my hard drive, allowing me to access them at a later date for editing purposes. I then placed the records and tapes in the trunk of my car. I concealed the notes in my vehicle, placing them beneath the spare tire. I then proceeded to meticulously organize the contents of the attic, ensuring that Marie was unaware of my presence. Over the following 2 weeks, I methodically devised and executed a series of plans. I found it considerably more straightforward than anticipated to maintain a facade of normalcy and to act as if nothing untoward had transpired. I was mindful of the fact that Marie had been deceiving me for 6 years, and thus, I saw no reason why I should not adopt a similar approach. Consequently, I adopted a demeanor of kindness and affection, assumed the role of a devoted partner and father, and even sought sexual intimacy with her on several occasions. I attempted to initiate contact on several occasions, however, I was careful to do so in a way that would allow her to decline if she so wished. I was not inclined to engage in any further physical contact. An important date in Marie's life was fast approaching. She had been elected as the new president of the Key Society, an important charity in our city. She would officially take office at a luncheon where she would give a speech outlining the charity's plans for the coming year. Marie had served on the Key Society board for 3 years and was honored to be named president. She was nervous about her presentation and asked me to help with the PowerPoint portion. She planned to use this as my golden opportunity for a week or so. I worked with her every evening, allowing her to show me her slides and other materials and organize them into a smooth presentation. She practiced this several times in the month leading up to her big night, and it always went well. At the same time, I made my own completely different PowerPoint presentation, which was ready to replace it the night before dinner. I deleted Marie's file and put mine in its place, and I also added a lock so that once the file starts running, she cannot disable it. My only remaining task was to ensure that Mary the First inquired as to whether she had invited Harry and his wife to dinner. She replied in the affirmative, stating that they would be in attendance on the designated evening. I was as eager as Marie, though for disparate reasons. We arrived early and Marie, attired in a black evening dress, exuded elegance. I assisted her in setting up the laptop and conducted a few tests to ascertain its functionality. We then proceeded to enjoy a meal and listen to opening remarks. Marie was subsequently introduced with warmth by the outgoing leader, and she proceeded to the podium, her demeanor initially reserved but soon giving way to a sense of pride as the audience applauded. She then initiated the PowerPoint presentation. He proceeded to present a series of images, initially showcasing the Society's primary charitable initiatives and subsequently presenting statistical data in the form of pie charts. As I had anticipated, he then deviated from the planned sequence of events. This was followed by a series of still images, selected from 2 videos of a couple engaged in sexual intercourse in various positions. While some of the images were somewhat underexposed, the overall impression conveyed by approximately 10 or 12 of them was that they depicted Marie and Harry. Thereafter, Marie proceeded to address a number of pivotal social issues for a brief period, before becoming aware of the sudden murmuring of the audience and turning to address them. She then observed the screen behind her and expressed audible shock. With a swift movement, she knocked over a glass of water onto the podium. For a brief moment, she stood motionless, exhibiting signs of profound distress. A vivid red blush rapidly covered her entire face and neck. She then began frantically pressing buttons on her laptop, hoping to halt the playback of the file. The presentation had transitioned from still photographs to short video clips. She was concerned about how she would prevent Bill from learning that she had become pregnant. As long as she allowed him to engage in sexual intercourse, he would not suspect anything. Harry had suggested this course of action, but there was a crucial caveat. There is an excess of infantile behavior. You are my possession. There is a commotion in the room, the sound of laughter and hooting emanating from all the tables. Marie is rendered immobile and speechless, too overwhelmed to even be embarrassed. At the next table, Caroline, Harry's wife, takes a vase of flowers and smashes it. Harry's head and left the room amidst laughter and shouting. People gradually filed out of the ballroom, looking back at Marie, gesturing to each other as they reenacted the amazing scene. Surprisingly soon, Marie and I were left alone. She stood defeated and lost on the podium. I sat at the table 10 feet away from her, smiling widely and looking up at her. Finally, she raised her eyes, met mine, and she wore an expression of profound sadness. Bill, how could you do this to me? I thought you loved me. Given the circumstances, I found her question curious. I burst out laughing and walked out the door, still laughing. No, I replied. Of course not. It wasn't like that at all. It was a pleasant fantasy, but it couldn't happen. The whole town will know that Harry is the father of my children, and I will lose custody of them in the divorce. Furthermore, they will be ashamed to be known as Marie's illegitimate children. I should have been more subtle, and I did it first. I visited a divorce attorney I knew several times and worked with him to prepare documents for when I needed them. I then created the exact PowerPoint file I had just described, but I didn't. It would be prudent to wait until Marie's dinner night to reproduce it. Instead, I set it up and cooked it for Marie one night for weeks before dinner. In the evening, when the children went to bed, I called Marie and said, "Honey, I want you to come and look at the draft of the PowerPoint file I made for your speech next month." "Can't it wait?" She replied angrily, "No, Bill, I can't wait." I informed her that I was dead tired and that I needed to see what changes were required so that I had time to make them. It is essential for me to ascertain what alterations are necessary so that I may implement them in a timely manner. It is important to note that I am investing my personal time and effort into this endeavor. I then proceeded to escort her into my office and instructed her to sit in front of the computer. I informed her that she could initiate the process by pressing the letter A when she was ready, after which the file would run on its own. I observed her closely and was pleased to note that she was progressing well initially. She rehearsed her remarks on the initial key slides of the presentation, then she gasped and her face paled as she observed still images of herself and Harry engaged in sexual intercourse. She turned to me, her mouth wide open, but did not utter a sound. I simply observed her expressionless countenance. Then, video clips of them discussing how he was the father of her children and had kept me in the dark and more sexual activity were presented. By this point, Marie was attempting to halt the playback, but I prevented her from doing so. The screen then became unresponsive and the process concluded within 2 minutes. Marie was still seated in the chair, head down, and unable to look at me. I observed her distress with detached interest. After the playback ended, she spoke, raising her head to look at me. Her demeanor had aged significantly, as if she had been through a decade of suffering. "Bill, I am profoundly sorry for my actions. I realize that I have caused you immense pain and suffering. I asked for your forgiveness not just for myself, but also for the role I played in your marriage. I had an affair with Harry Dorner, which began 6 years ago, during the time we were married. I bear him 2 children and I am responsible for leading you to believe that they were yours. I also bear responsibility for laughing at you and speaking contemptuously about you behind your back. I was subsequently denied sexual intercourse at Harry's insistence. Do you wish me to forgive you for this?" She was sobbing even more. "Bill, I do not love Harry. I have always loved you." My anger was cold and restrained. I did not speak, but I thought, "Marie, this is unacceptable. You love our life together. You appreciate how I take care of everything for you. I provide care for the children, yet you do not love me. It is not possible for a woman to love her husband and behave in the manner you do behind his back." I observed her crying and was pleased to see this. I did not speak during the 20 minutes it took her to cry. Finally, she sobbed several times, wiped her face with her hands, and looked at me. "What are you going to do, Bill? Are you going to divorce me?" "No, Marie. I will not do that. I am not willing to abandon my children, even if they are not biologically mine." I paused for a moment, allowing the words to hang in the air, then continued, "Everything will be different from now on. You can be sure of that. Let's start right now. Call that __ Harry and tell him to be here in 15 minutes. She appeared horrified, but I could not proceed. He was at home with his wife and children, he would not come. I smiled and said, "Tell him to come here. You can tell him from me that if he does not appear here within 15 minutes, then tomorrow his marriage will be dissolved." She looked at me, perhaps afraid of the coldness on my face, then without saying another word, she went to the kitchen. Subsequently, she contacted her romantic partner when Harry arrived. He offered a genial, though somewhat insincere, smile, which I had anticipated. It was evident that Marie had informed him of the developments, and he appeared concerned. "Harry, please accompany me to the office, and you, too, Marie. We have some matters to discuss." Once seated, I began, "Harry, I must inform you that you have been engaging in a romantic relationship with Marie for an extended period." He proceeded to explain that the relationship had been ongoing for a considerable period of time, during which I had been made to appear foolish. He then informed me that the relationship was over and that I would be held accountable for the consequences. He began to respond, but I interrupted him, instructing him to listen and observe. I then proceeded to review the PowerPoint file, which I found to contain disturbing content. When the file stopped, I was pleased to see him express shock and horror. There was then a long, awkward silence. I found this outcome more agreeable. "At this juncture, I am in a position to dictate the terms of your future conduct. Should you fail to comply, your marriage to Caroline will be abruptly and publicly terminated. I advise you to acquiesce without demur." He signaled his assent with a reluctant nod. His demeanor suggested displeasure. "I have a number of documents that you are required to sign. I will provide them to you one at a time. You may wish to consult with an attorney before signing. You are permitted to consult with your lawyer regarding these documents, but you must return them to me within 48 hours, duly signed. Otherwise, Caroline will be invited to view a short video. The first document states that you acknowledge your status as the biological father of Katie and Brian and agree to provide financial support for them until they reach the age of 21, along with a lump sum for their college education. The amounts are itemized in the document. The amount is $100,000 per child per year, plus an additional $100. The document goes on to stipulate that the money will be placed in a trust fund, of which I am the sole trustee. I am authorized to use it as I see fit for the needs of the two children. Harry was visibly enraged. Listen, Bill. This is complete absurdity. I have no intention of doing what you're suggesting. I pushed him back into the chair and told him to be quiet. Harry, you have money and we both know it very well. This is not your show anymore, it's mine. You have no choice now but to comply with my instructions. You may speak. I observed Marie regarding me from across the room with a countenance of horror. This was a previously unobserved aspect of her demeanor toward her husband. The second document provides authorization for me to adopt two children. You and Marie will be required to sign it. I will request her signature after you return the document to me. This is the third statement in which you irrevocably renounce your parental rights to Katie and Brian. You also swear never to disclose to anyone that you are their biological father. Finally, this is a personal admission that you sexually harassed my wife in the workplace, forcing her to engage in an extramarital affair with you. This is a complete facade. She was as eager to participate as I was. Anything with any of these documents, but this is my insurance, Harry. In case you ever consider reneging on your financial obligations to your two children, or in case it suddenly occurs to you that you wish someone else knew who their biological father is, I have provided Marie with a sexual harassment complaint, drafted by my lawyer. Marie still appeared frightened. She silently took the pen from my hand and signed the complaint at the bottom. Now, Harry, we are almost done with your part of today's meeting. I anticipate that these documents will be returned to me within 48 hours. You may deliver them to the residence. In the event that you entertain the notion of assassinating me, I can assure you that multiple copies of your incriminating correspondence and romantic missives to Marie have been placed in a secure location. Additionally, I have instructed several individuals to ensure that these documents would be disclosed in the event of my demise. I then led Marie back into the office and instructed her to sit down. I had never observed her in such a state of distress. She was visibly trembling with horror. It is all right, Marie. I will never strike you. You have no reason to be afraid. God, Bill, what has come over you? How could you do this to Harry? I regarded her with some surprise. You do not truly comprehend, Marie. You do not understand the gravity of what he has done to you and to me. It is wrong and wicked. She blushed, and I could see that she was aware of her own actions. It is simple. You are so angry, it is as though you have lost your reason. I had nothing to say in response, so I remained silent for a moment. Marie, I have already told you that I will not. I am divorcing you, but our marriage will not be the same going forward. Everything will be different. Do you understand me? Of course, Bill. I will do anything to make up for what I have done. What did I do to you? She looked at me pleadingly. Okay, I said. Let's start with a couple of conditions. You will find a new job within 2 weeks. I will no longer allow you to see Harry every day at work. I hope this is obvious, but you will never have any personal contact with Harry again. No touching. No kissing. It is imperative that there be no sexual intercourse, no telephone calls, and no emails. In the event that our marriage is to continue, it must be on a completely different basis. I no longer wish to endure your bad mood, your coldness, and your indifference. I expect you to be a fun, kind, and loving wife every day. Your behavior will demonstrate that you love me and are grateful. Given that you have married me and have engaged in sexual activity with me and only Harry, I expect you to engage in sexual activity with me now. I look forward to seeing you in the lingerie you have never worn, the one hidden in the back of your drawer. I looked at her meaningfully, and she lowered her eyes in shame. I expect you to Marie, if you truly love me, you will be ready, willing, and eager when I want to have sex. There is a considerable amount of lost time that you will have to make up for. She walked across the room and knelt at my feet, wrapping her arms tightly around my legs and looking at me. I love you, Bill, more than I can express, and I will demonstrate the depth of my affection. I promised her. I looked at her pale face, stained with tears, at her frightened eyes. Inside me, there were remnants of the love and devotion that I felt for this woman with whom I shared so much. However, they were overshadowed, reduced to insignificance by my anger at her selfishness and hypocrisy. She deserved it. I feigned a slight softening of my stance. "Listen, Marie," I said in a more subdued tone. "In 4 weeks, your significant social event will take place. Let us utilize this time to rebuild our marriage and potentially create a more fulfilling relationship. If everything goes according to plan, our dinner will serve as a celebration of our success. Of our new endeavor, what do you say?" She nodded at me, tightening her grip on my legs. "Yes, Bill. Thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance. I will be what you want me to be." "Then I'll start making amends," she said, standing up and smiling. She left the room, and I sat back in my chair, grinning to myself. I was anticipating the next 4 weeks, which I expected to be quite enjoyable. I was somewhat surprised that she did not notice what I had not done. One might inquire about the specifics of the affair, including its inception. Given the circumstances, it is understandable that Marie was unable to process the situation fully. However, I did not pursue this line of questioning because I was no longer invested in understanding her perspective. I had already made my decision regarding Marie. When I entered the bedroom a few minutes later, I observed that the room had been made ready, the lights were dimmed, and Marie was lying on her side in an incredibly revealing red nightgown. She proceeded to wash her face, comb her hair, and fix her makeup. She looked amazing, as beautiful as ever. However, she also looked very nervous. I noticed that there was a bottle of lube on the nightstand. "You," she said in a seductive voice, but with a slight tremor in her voice. "Come to me." She extended her arms towards me, and I quickly removed my clothes. We embraced, and our lips met. Her body was warm, and she wriggled like a snake. Whether it was pure play, I found the experience enjoyable. I was able to set aside my feelings of rage and disgust towards Marie and instead focus on the pleasure of the moment. I experienced a profound sense of disquiet and revulsion towards Marie. Despite this, I allowed myself to become immersed in the pleasure she offered. She possessed a beautiful body, and her impatience was a source of considerable excitement, particularly given the indifference she had displayed over the course of many years. I rolled onto my back, allowing her to assume the dominant position, which she seemed pleased to do. Once she had finished, she turned off the light and embraced me. She then proceeded to disrobe and crawl into bed with me. She kissed my neck and said, "Sleep well," as I fell into a contented slumber. I looked forward to receiving the same level of attention over the next 4 weeks. I found the following weeks quite enjoyable as Marie dedicated herself to rebuilding our marriage. The next morning, she woke me up she greeted me with a cheerful smile and a loving kiss, inquiring as to whether I would appreciate some below-the-belt pleasure before breakfast. I observed with interest as Marie went above and beyond her usual duties of preparing the children for their day. I returned home to partake in an unconventional meal that Marie had procured from a cookbook. I consulted a cookbook and attempted to prepare a meal for Katie and Brian, who had requested hot dogs and macaroni and cheese. They did not care for the dish, but I found it palatable. Marie took the initiative to ensure that the children bathed and retired for the night at a reasonable hour, allowing us to enjoy our evening. Our nightly sexual encounter in the bedroom was a welcome change of pace. On the previous night, Marie had worn another sexy nightie, and we engaged in leisurely sexual intercourse. Despite my secret feelings, her enthusiasm, affection, and energy were exactly the same. I could not help but notice that we acted like 2 happy newlyweds day after day. Marie's loving attention was not limited to her cheerful and helpful demeanor. In the mornings and with the children and tigress in the bedroom, there are some new and exciting lingerie items that have recently become available on the market. They have been well received by all. Several new positions were explored and some of them were particularly enjoyable. My life has become a happy fantasy, except that I no longer trust my wife. Despite my outwardly happy submission to her attentions, I was secretly filled with rage, and I was only pretending to share her loving feelings. The papers Harry signed were in my mailbox within 48 hours, as I had requested. I then quickly got Marie to sign the adoption consent and took it to my lawyer that same week. A private hearing was arranged before a judge, and 10 days later, the legal adoption was finalized. My lawyer then proceeded to handle the divorce papers. One morning at work, I received a surprise visit from Denise Reynolds, a colleague with whom I occasionally collaborate on projects. She was 28 years old, 5 years my junior. Denise Reynolds was a strikingly attractive woman. I was aware that she was divorced and that her comments to me occasionally seemed flirtatious. However, I did not consider her beyond the realm of possibility as a sexual partner. In my fantasies, she was one of a number of women I would engage in sexual intercourse with. I anticipated that Denise's visit would be work-related. She inquired as to the nature of the change in my demeanor and physical condition. I replied that I was not certain, but that I appeared to have aged less or to be in better physical condition. I thanked her for the compliment. I then proceeded to engage in a discussion of a topic that was entirely unrelated to the initial conversation. "Perhaps we can have lunch together today," she replied. We proceeded to the salad bar, procured our lunches, and proceeded to a table in the park, where we enjoyed the sun while we ate. "The difference in me that you noticed is probably that my marriage is in a state of dissolution," she said, looking puzzled. "This makes you look better. Please elucidate." I provided her with a meticulously crafted account of the events a couple of weeks ago. I discovered that my wife was engaging in an adulterous relationship with a colleague. This has been ongoing for an extended period. I offered him some gentle guidance to encourage him to cease his pursuit of her. Since then, she has been attempting to rectify the situation. I am willing to make amends. I will divulge a secret. Denise Marie believes she can exact revenge on me, but I have already resolved that in a few weeks I will no longer be in a relationship with her. I am unable to coexist with a woman who has betrayed me in such a manner. In the meantime, she treats me with great deference, both in and out of the bedroom. That is the distinction you have observed. Today, she regarded me with a discerning gaze. I am impressed that you have managed to recover so well following the discovery of my ex's infidelity. I found the experience so traumatic that it took several months for me to regain my composure. I am genuinely sorry for your situation, but I have managed to take control of my circumstances. I am developing in a way that aligns with my own preferences rather than being influenced by external factors. This shift in perspective has significantly improved my sense of well-being. I have also recognized the positive aspect of my current situation, despite not being officially single, is that I anticipate this status change in the near future. This allows me the freedom to express my admiration for the individual in question without reservation. The lady who was sitting with me in the park today looked at me and smiled. She blushed slightly and looked away, then looked back at me. "Lord Bill, you have placed me in a somewhat compromising position. I had not anticipated that the situation would unfold in this way. I am sorry, Denise, but you are so beautiful and so funny. I have been attracted to you since we met. However, until now, it was considered inappropriate to discuss the matter further. However, should you have the opportunity to dine with me on Saturday, I would like to suggest a particular Italian restaurant overlooking the river." She regarded me with a serious expression. "Bill, I must tell you that I also have feelings for you. I have always found it easy to trust you. However, I am uncertain as to whether your marriage is truly over or if this is merely a ruse. To engage in sexual intercourse with me, I ask your pardon, but I have observed this situation before, Denise. I have always been straightforward with you, as you are aware. I have never been a source of annoyance to you. I am terminating my marriage with Marie in approximately 2 weeks and will file for divorce on the same day. There is no possibility of reversal, but I comprehend if you wish to repel me. I must admit that I am somewhat disappointed." She smiled. "Now that you have made me an offer, I am prepared to accept it before you change your mind." The situation was concluded. I smiled at her like a happy child when I informed my wife that I had a date on Saturday night. This certainly elicited a negative response from me. I made it clear that I would be going out with another woman and that I expected her to remain at home with the children. Bill Marie was shocked and seemed ready to cry, but I attempted to salvage our marriage by contemplating the possibility of reconciliation. However, it became evident that Marie had not only engaged in an extramarital relationship but had also engaged in sexual intercourse with the other party for 6 years. Despite her recent positive behavior, I was unable to fully trust her again. It is evident that I will have to engage in sexual activity with another individual for an extended period before we can resume our relationship. As she began to cry, I inquired whether she would engage in sexual intercourse with him. She replied in the negative, but I was able to do so, and this is precisely what I must come to terms with if it causes you distress. You may find this helps you understand how I felt. I then terminated the conversation by leaving the room. My initial encounters with Denise were pleasant but cautious. We took our time, and both of us likely felt that we were experiencing something more than mere sexual attraction. We conversed and laughed, expressed our grievances about our co-workers, and discussed our personal lives. The workers recounted stories about their upbringing and recent acquaintanceship. It was a convenient and straightforward arrangement. It evoked memories of my initial days with Marie. The thought was disconcerting, but I dismissed it after our third dinner. As I opened Denise's car door outside her apartment, she inquired, "Do you want to come in?" We both understood the implication, and I was immediately aroused when we entered. She was immediately in my arms, and we were kissing and embracing in a manner reminiscent of adolescence. She disengaged from my embrace and stated, "I am eager to consummate this relationship, but I am also anxious. It has been a considerable length of time, so I kindly request that you be patient with me and take your time." I responded with a smile and lifted her in my arms. "Which direction leads to your bedroom?" The sexual encounter with Denise was exquisite, yet markedly distinct from my previous experiences with Marie. Initially, she exhibited a degree of shyness and passivity. I was permitted to stroke and caress her breasts and body, but she was so attractive that I derived pleasure from every aspect of her physical form. Our inaugural sexual encounter was characterized by a relaxed and gentle quality, and it was markedly more affectionate than the athletic sexual intercourse I had previously engaged in with Marie. It was as if two individuals who are emotionally invested in one another were engaged in an act of mutual pleasure and intimacy, and when we concluded, Denise initiated multiple kisses and inquired if I would be willing to remain overnight. I was delighted to accept her invitation, and we eventually fell asleep in the following morning. She was somewhat embarrassed once more, and we did not engage in sexual intercourse. However, we did bid each other farewell with sincerity and kissed tenderly on several occasions. There were only a few days remaining until my significant wedding night with Marie. I did not inform Denise of my plans, but I did tell her that I would be officially divorced in the near future and that I would begin the divorce proceedings upon my return at approximately 9 o'clock. On the morning of the 30th, Marie was observed to be in a state of quiet distress at the kitchen table. It was evident that I had spent the previous night feigning sympathy with her to a greater extent than I felt. I embraced her in a gesture of consolation. "I am sorry, Marie. I am aware of your feelings. Believe me, this is a most unfortunate situation. The mere thought of you is distressing. In another woman's bed, I experience a profound sense of anguish. I have been remarkably self-centered over the years, failing to consider the impact of my actions on others. How could I not have considered your feelings and how my novel would make you feel?" She looked at me and said, thank you, for forgiving me and giving me another chance." Marie's exceptional night, like mine, was rapidly approaching. To some extent, I was overcome with a sense of regret. The preceding 4 weeks with Marie, including highly satisfying sexual intercourse, were enjoyable, and I will miss them. However, her actions did not diminish my resentment and anger. Her complete betrayal went far beyond what she could do to make amends. When I examined my feelings, I found only a small amount of love and a small amount of sympathy for what was about to happen to her. While working with her on a PowerPoint presentation for a speech, I also prepared my own version, which differed from the one she saw because I needed to hide Harry's identity and the fact that he was involved. I informed Marie that the children's father was, in fact, Harry. The general approach was consistent: first, a series of photographs and then some wonderful videos. I set up the laptop so that Marie's presentation would play every time she used it. However, by pressing a key combination, including a lock combination, I could prevent her from accessing her presentation and replace it with my own special file. This process occurred both in the days leading up to the dinner and that evening. Marie fearfully asked me if I had deleted the file that had played for her 4 weeks ago. Each time, with a loving smile, I reassured her that it was gone and I would go to. I demonstrated to Marie that her presentation was available for playback on the laptop with a single click of a button. In the days preceding the event, Marie's demeanor had become noticeably more confident, suggesting that she was making progress in winning me over again. Her affectionate attention seemed to manifest with a greater sense of composure and a less urgent intensity. Conversely, the distress she experienced when I spent the entire night with Denise intensified her feelings of longing and vulnerability. As the moment of our departure drew near, I found immense joy in every moment leading up to the big night. I arrived early, dressed in a rented tuxedo, while Marie looked radiant in a black evening dress. Spaghetti straps revealed her neck and shoulders. We executed a double run-through of her PowerPoint presentation to instill confidence in its functionality as she leaned over to place her purse beneath the podium. I rapidly entered the key combination, concluding that everything was in order and that the proceedings would unfold precisely as anticipated. We proceeded to enjoy a satisfactory dinner, engaging in cordial discourse with our acquaintances seated around the table. There were a few perfunctory greetings, after which Marie was formally introduced by the outgoing president. She proceeded with a certain degree of trepidation to the podium, accompanied by a general expression of approval. According to my observation, her enthusiasm was. The elation that had previously been evident in Marie's demeanor dissipated rapidly, and within 54 seconds, her expression had transformed into one of distress. This abrupt change in emotional state was observed to occur between the initiation of the PowerPoint presentation and the onset of still images depicting her infidelity. While Marie did not exhibit any outward signs of shock or disbelief, such as a frozen or overturned glass of water, her eyes betrayed a profound sense of disquiet, as though she was struggling to comprehend the unfolding situation. Attempting to halt the playback of the presentation, she turned to face me with a look of anguish and dismay. However, her efforts were unsuccessful, and as the video clip commenced, the sound waves filled the room. Marie's initial response was one of passive acceptance, as she stood with her back to the audience, her gaze fixed on the floor. As the initial shock of the presentation's content gave way to a more hostile reaction, she did not offer any further resistance or attempt to flee the scene. She exhibited a combination of indignation and mirth, responding to the obscene epithets hurled at her by the retreating crowd with indifference. A few minutes later, we were alone. I sat silently, observing her from my position at the table. Finally, she spoke, her words a direct challenge to my actions. "Bill, how could you do this? I had assumed that you loved me." "Indeed, Marie," I replied, "I have loved you just as much as you loved me 6 years ago." I then proceeded to the podium and placed several folded sheets of paper in her hand. "I am divorcing you. You are advised to take this seriously. If you remain in this relationship, you will be granted joint custody of the children. Custody of Katie and Brian. Otherwise, I will pursue full custody, and I am confident that I will prevail." As I was about to exit the room, I heard her scream in anger and pain. "However, you had previously stated that you would not divorce me and that we could attempt to resolve the issue." I turned around and looked at her. "Yes, Marie," I said, indicating my acquiescence to your wishes. "After years of being deceived by you, I deceived myself. Subscribe to our channel to avoid your partner's infidelity and proceed with the next story, which is more impactful than this one. Individuals under the age of 18 should refrain from listening to the next story.